I'm Shruti Bharat. In 2021, I had my beautiful son, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me. But I also realized that it was an emotional roller coaster. I wasn't ready for all the changes that happened within me and all of my relationships. But I also realized I am not alone. I accessed a lot of great content during this time, but realized that there just wasn't enough from an Indian context. And I want to do something to change that. Last year, I set up Beyond the Bump, which is a fully volunteer-run platform. And as part of the content offerings of this platform, I'm starting a new podcast called Bump In. It's an opportunity to meet a lot of everyday parents who share their stories of how they're not only surviving, but thriving inside and after the 0 to 24 month phase. So join me as we talk about the highs, lows, the madness, and the inevitable challenges with some laughter sprinkled in between. Be sure to listen all the way till the end for some important takeaways and some resources that might help support your journey. See you soon. Hi, Tanaya. Welcome to Bump In. As you know, this is a podcast that I'm developing as part of the platform Beyond the Bump, which is something I set up a few months ago to help moms, parents like you and me, get through this journey with a little bit more energy, resources, good laughs, maybe, and a little bit of more compassion for our own experiences. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today and share your story. As with most conversations, what I like to do is begin with who you are, what's your story. So please let our audience know who you are, and also, of course, a big hello.
Hi, no, lovely to be here, and thank you for having me on this show. And I think it's just, it's really cool what you're doing, because I think you do need these kind of resources that are talking more about the emotions and not just, the nitty-gritty of parenting. So that's so lovely to be here. Yeah, a little bit about myself. I'm 40 now.
It's a new
I'm
20.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
But grew up in Bangalore, have been married now like 14 years. I've worked in social impact and customer experience design, that kind of stuff. So financial inclusion, education. Have lived in different places. So lived in the US, then in Kenya, was back in India for the last 5 years. I'm now based in London, and I have a 6-year-old daughter, Amaani.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for that. You are the second person today that I'm talking to who's based outside of India, but has a very, obviously being Indian and completely rooted in this community and culture, it's so interesting to see how you're bringing in your travels and your world experience into also, your parenting style, I suppose, and we'll learn more about that. What about your partner, your husband? Is there anything you want to share about him and how you guys make the magic happen with the family?
Magic on some days seems like quite a far call. But yeah, Sandeep and I were in undergrad together, so we've known each other a very long time. And we waited a long time before we got married, and then even after we got married, it was before we had Amaani, it was about 7 years. So, um, and I'm saying that because I think I often reflect that that's actually made us much better parents. We were older and had less energy for sure. Uh,
That's the only downside.
yeah, that's the downside, but the upside is I think we got to do so much together, right? We traveled, we did everything we want to, so we have very little of, oh God, we've had to give up so much to have a kid. I think we were very ready, when we wanted to have a money, and we are able to like fully lean into kind of this phase of our life. So that's been
No, I
great.
totally relate.
Yeah.
Totally relate to that. I've been married for a really long time. I've known my husband for 18 years. I dated for the longest time. We got
Yeah.
married. We've had, by all accounts, had a child quite late by Indian standards.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have it any other way. So I totally, totally relate to what
Exactly.
you're sharing. That's lovely.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm glad to know that we're not alone in that decision. I'm clearly learning that from all the wonderful conversations I'm having. So Tanaya, you
Yeah.
know that through Bump In, I'm trying to have conversations, particularly in this sort of first
Mm.
cycle or first season, where we really spend some time and understand pregnancy, understand those really early days, despite the blurriness and the lack of sleep. It's different, but it's tough on everyone. I don't think there's anyone who's ever said there was the easiest time of my life.
Yeah.
I really love to meet someone who says that and really talk to them and understand. I really wanted to spend some time in hearing about your journey. I know you had a really unique experience, and I know a lot of people will benefit from hearing about what you went through and how you've been so resilient in the face of it, and clearly now thriving and doing fantastically. So, why don't you start us off with your pregnancy a little bit and how that was and where that went?
Sure. And happy to share. And, I was just reflecting on this conversation this morning and thinking, uh, I was very superstitious when I was pregnant. I actually didn't want to hear about anything that had gone wrong. Um,
Wow.
uh, and of course, I had
Yeah.
like, and then lots of things went wrong as I'll share
Great.
shortly. But I think actually. Um, yeah, so I think this people will receive this in different ways, but I think the objective is really to say, um, you know, our life doesn't go at every point of time quite how we think it goes, right? And all of us who are like quite driven and accomplished, we like think we can control a lot of things, but my big learning has been you can't, right? Like life's going to unfold and you kind of have to roll with it because you don't really have a choice. So anyway, I
Yeah.
think my pregnancy itself, I had quite a hard first trimester. I think, they had to put me on some progesterone. And so I just felt tired all the time. And then I had like
Wow.
an amazing second trimester, like really great. All my energy came back. I was like able to do stuff. I was just so happy in my second trimester. I had a lovely second trimester. And then
It's a cruising moment.
it is
It's when you cruise
completely
through the pregnancy. Yeah.
I was like, I've got this, no problem. Uh, and then, we were living in Kenya then, and my mother-in-law threw us, what we call in South India Seemantam, but
Yes.
like a little baby shower, right? So and that was in Bombay. So we came. It was really like a lovely event because she had, kind of tuned it to me, and I'm not super religious or conservative. So she had done it very nicely. It was like, there was chat and we had friends over and there was like beer the next day. It was really nice. So it was a really lovely this thing. And then I, came to Bangalore for 5 days because I wanted to spend some time with my parents. And then, my mom and I were going back and forth. We were saying, I decided at that point I'll come back to India to deliver. But I was still at like 27 weeks. So it was a way out. So we were debating, should I come back at, 36 weeks, 32 weeks? Like this was all the stuff that is going on. And anyway, so then we like found, we had a recommendation for an OBGYN, and I went and met her, and she said, why don't you have your third trimester scan? And I was like, no, like this is on Friday, and I'm going back to Kenya on Sunday. So I was like, it's fine. I'll just go back and have it. It's just a few days away. And she was like, no, go get your scan. And I'll see you after, it'll give us also a chance to build our relationship. So I go the next day, I have my scan, and they find that, this was like a horrible moment in like how I think we did it in India, which was the guys like scanning my tummy, and there's someone sitting there like typing, right? So he's calling out to them. He's not talking to me. He's calling out to them over me and saying, fetus in distress, uh,
Wow.
some IUG. Like he's saying stuff, and I'm like, what's happening? What's happening? He's like, no, you go meet your doctor. Right. So I come out, I call my mom and I'm like, you need to come. Something is wrong. Like, I don't know what's wrong.
Yeah.
My mom's a doctor. So I was like, you need to come. So she came, we go meet the doctor, and she was like, there is like the baby is basically like not growing the way we need it to grow. And so, we may have to get may have to get her out early. And so we don't know. We'll try our best to keep her in and this thing. But anyway, what ended up happening was 4 days later, Amaani actually came.
Wow.
Um, so she came at 28 weeks. She was 650 grams when she came. Uh, and I mean, she was the smallest baby that the NICU had ever had. And so literally before we had her, they said to us, I don't know if she's going to survive. You have to decide what you want to do. And we were like, no, there's no way. Like, we're going to go ahead and have her. And then, but there's, all the risks. And they said to us, you can, something might be wrong with her gut, something might be wrong with her brain, something might be wrong with the lungs, right? And the lungs are kind of the last to develop. So,
Yeah.
they gave me like whatever steroids, whatever to get that thing. But that's what happened. So she came and literally like, because it was so early, they didn't even let my husband into the labor room or anything like that. They sent him, she came out, they intubated her because, she can't breathe. She's like that tiny. And they sent her to the NICU. And I'm literally like, what's going on? Is she okay? And my doctor pops up like this in front of next to me and says, it's a girl. And I was like, I already knew that because in Kenya, we knew what this thing. So I said, I already knew that. She said, no, she's fine. She's good. So they took her away. So anyway,
Wow.
that was the beginning of our long journey from there.
Tanaya, that is, as you were describing, I got chills. I know that you have, time has passed and, she's doing well now, touch wood. And
Yeah.
I, I, I just cannot even fathom what it would have been like to be in that situation. And it is amazing to see the smile on your face as you tell that story because you've been through it and
Yeah.
you're stronger for it. But wow, I mean, just the only word that comes to mind is wow. I mean, to have such a tiny little, they're already so tiny and vulnerable when they're in full term. I don't know what
Yeah.
650 grams kind of looks like, but so amazing. What were the next 3 months like for you and your family, and
Yeah.
share with us what in that time was going through your head? What were you dealing with as a mom, and what was everyone else trying to do in the process as well?
Yeah, I mean, Amani ended up spending 100 days in the NICU.
Yeah.
So literally little more than the first, than the third trimester, right?
Yes,
So,
yes.
and it was, I mean, it was wild, right? Because on one side, Sandeep and I, we were both just, I don't know why, but we were just in our heads, we were like, she's going to be okay. And we don't know,
Yeah.
there's no evidence to support this, but she's going to be okay.
Yeah.
But they said to us when she was born, they were like, first it's going to be hour by hour only we can tell you whether she's going to, make it or not. And then it was day by day, and then it was week by week. So that's kind of how things unfolded.
Yeah.
Uh, and I mean, you have these same moments, but in such weird and different ways, right? So, when I met Amani for the first time the day after she was born because I wasn't, mobile enough to actually get to the NICU. But it was still like it was a magical moment because I had to like stick my finger into like because they had the cover on the incubator because they still I needed the heat and all of that. So I had to like stick my finger through the porthole, but she like grabbed my finger and like that I had this moment of okay, yeah, I'm a mom, like whatever this looks like, and this doesn't look like what you thought it would look like, but that's I am a mom.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, I think over time you kind of get into the rhythm of the NICU. So, I was literally, I was pumping because, you don't develop the reflex to breastfeed till I think 30 weeks or something like that. So just before it comes, so she didn't actually have that reflex. So all through I pumped. And so I was pumping maybe like 6, 8 times a day to this thing. So you would wake up in the morning, I would pump, I would eat breakfast. Like I'm so hungry, and I'm also an idli monster, so I'd eat like I don't know many tatte idlis before I would set off. But I would do that, and then by 9 o'clock every day, her doctor would come for the rounds of the NICU. So you do everything to get there, and literally then the doctor would walk, you know, to each kid in turn. And I remember at about 2 weeks in, um, Sandeep and I talked and we said we have to give her a name, right? And we don't know what's going to happen, but whatever it is, she's here and she's going to be named and she's going to be, and she's here and
Yeah.
she's a person and she's here. And and we came up with Amaani, and we were like really happy about it, and we did like funky things with her surname. We did all of that. But I remember the day after that, when we were doing the rounds, I told the doctor, I said, "Oh, her name is Amaani," and he did not respond, right? He didn't say anything about it. And then he went on, and maybe 2 months later, he turned to me and he was like, "What did you say her name was again?" And then I realized that at that point he couldn't. He was like, "I can't take it. Like, these people have like gone and named this child, and I don't know what's going to happen to her," right?
Yeah.
And I think like life in the NICU is just very up and down. It's literally every day, because the kids are so young, they constantly develop infections. So day to day, you don't know what's going to happen. So I'd go to the NICU maybe like 4 times a day. And about 10 days in, they started having me do kangaroo care, which is, you have the baby on your chest, and that's supposed to be really good for the baby and for the mom. And we had like these funny moments. Uh, After a couple of weeks of me doing this and like being like, this is the most amazing thing ever, my husband was like, I also want to do it. And the NICU had never considered this, right? And dads really get a raw deal sometimes in all of this. They were like, you can't. So they didn't even have like a gown that fit him properly. My doctor's like, okay, fine, you can do it. But they don't even have a gown that fits him properly because they only have like gowns for the women.
Women.
But he also did it. And we would do, we would do all these things. Like I would go to the NICU in the evening. Every evening I would read her a book and I would sing to her, and we would like spend this time with her. And slowly over time, they would start letting us do some things, right? Like because she had a feeding tube, you'd like feed her through with this like little, syringe kind of thing. So slowly, they'd let us change her diaper, all of that. And um, yeah, and so that was kind of it. So you just keep getting hit by shocks a lot,
Yeah.
and then you kind of get over it and then move to the next one. And then I think I had a really rough time right around Christmas, because somehow in my head her due date was December 26th, and I was like, she's going to come home on by December 26th, and she was actually sick over that period, right? So there was like no chance she was going to come
Wow.
home then. And like I think that was one of the hardest periods of the NICU for me, because I was just like, I had this vision. I was like, okay, if that happens, then it's going to be okay. She ended up coming back, home about 2 weeks later, but that was hard.
Wow. Tanaya, it sounds like you said something about how regimented, like how like there's a schedule at the NICU,
Mm.
and I think in some sense it sounds like you and Sandeep sort of that schedule kept it going for you. It helped you
Mm.
anchor yourself to something and sort of have a an experience with your baby who was here too soon, perhaps, but she was beginning to respond to a lot of the things that you were doing in slow ways, and that gave you a lot of hope, even if other people didn't have as much hope as you do. And I think the fact that you said, and I love that, right? The conviction that you had that she's here, she's not going anywhere. And I think, I mean, I would absolutely have the same feeling had I been in such a situation. And I think that's part of the takeaway for me of those 100 days, right? The absolute like almost like this completely blinding confidence that everything would be okay is sometimes all you can have, right? Especially in situations like
Yeah.
this where you don't really know what's happening. I read an article a few days ago about how obviously postpartum anxiety and even postpartum depression is something that everyone grapples with to some level. I think it's a spectrum, and it comes and goes. It's not always depression in its full form, but it's some form of blues, anxiety. And what I did read is that mothers or parents, for that matter, but particularly mothers whose babies have spent time in the NICU are often more susceptible and are often more likely to present symptoms of, a great deal of anxiety because of the extremely traumatic experience of birth and recovery. What is your take on this? Do you think that this was part of your experience as well once Amani came home? And how the next few months kind of went forth for you? What was your experience of that?
Yeah, I'm really glad you're asking this. I think this is something we don't talk about enough,
Much
definitely
or
in
at all.
families.
Yeah.
And it's very much swept under the carpet. And even like I think as mums, we don't quite talk about this as much as we should. I think so. What was funny was I think when she was in the NICU, you had this purpose, right? Which was to get her to come home. And so you kind
Yeah.
of just got through it. And even Sandeep and I, we were just like we were very much on the same page. And I think we are a very good crisis team. So we like actually did very well.
Yeah.
It was actually when she came home that I kind of felt myself falling apart. And she came home, it was also, if she came home at I think a little over, she came home at like 1.5 kgs, right? So this is not like she's coming home, even at that weight, she's not a full-term baby weight, right? And she came
Correct.
home on an insane number of medications, and is falling sick every 7 days, almost, right? Like that's
Wow.
kind of how she came home. And she came home, and we had to like, they had given us this weird, like, I don't know if you ever heard about this, called a palada. It's
Yes.
this weird device, right, with this like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It
pokey
looks
thing in
like a
front.
diya on top of a stand.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, right?
Yes,
So
yes, yes.
they've given us this device, and you have to feed her with it. And we found the only way you could feed her is literally you have to soak some rag in milk. She's chewing on it one side, and then you're like doing this diya thing on the other side. It was like feeding her was a nightmare. And that is happening every 2 hours. And then there's all these cycles of medication that you're tracking and monitoring and all of this stuff. So it was so in the NICU, at least you knew she's in safe hands. It's okay, now it's like your job to keep her alive. And this is still a very sick baby. It's
Child.
not, it's not like she's home, she's perfectly okay. And so I think, you know, after she came back, I found myself every evening I would go on a walk and I would just sit somewhere and I would weep, right?
Wow.
And then I'd come back and like this thing, or I'd call my sister and I would weep, and then I'd just think like, but that's how it was. And maybe I think 12 days into her coming back, I reached out to friends and I said, I think I need to find a therapist. I need to talk to someone. I can't like, I'm not doing well. I'm just not doing well in my head. This is I'm struggling.
Yeah.
Uh, and, I think I've had my journey with therapists, but I think therapy has been just so, I mean, I think what's helped me find the resilience and find it within myself to actually move forward, because that first year was very hard. It wasn't just, the 3 months in the NICU. She came home in January. In the beginning of April, she got hospitalized again, and she was in hospital for another month. And that is really touch and go, and I can come back to that if you want. But I think just having an outlet where I could go and just go blah with everything that is on my mind. And I had I think tremendous anxiety, tremendous just yeah, grief actually, because of the way she came. I think what I figured out is that I lost a lot of things, right? I lost because we lived in Kenya, and we had her in Bangalore, but in this crazy way, we never went back to Kenya. Friends packed our house up, put it on a ship, and it arrived. So I never got to say goodbye to my life in Kenya. And I lost everything about how I thought I would deliver, how I thought that first 3 months would be, the first year would be, what my experience of parenting would be. All of that, nothing was the way I had imagined it in any way. And I think it's never the way you imagine it, right? Because you're an idiot before you actually have your kid. So that's
Absolutely. Yeah.
but mine was definitely like well off the norm. So I think I had a lot of, yeah, I had a lot of grief about it, and I had to like come to terms with that, and really find and develop coping strategies and mechanisms. And I think one of the really amazing things I think that has come out of this whole thing for me is I was always a person whose identity was very much focused around my work. Uh, and I gave my work everything, and that gave me energy and gave me my sense of purpose and who I am and all of that. And suddenly to be in this situation where I'm I'll maybe talk about this separately, but I was like, at many points I was like, I need to go back to work now, right? And I couldn't, because at every point something big would happen that just doesn't allow me to do that. So I was
Yeah.
doing some consulting and whatever, but I wasn't at proper full-time work. And so it forced me to actually think about, who am I outside of work, and actually, who am I as a human being, and what am I, what actually anchors me. And I think I've come out of that process, I think, just much happier with, and I think maybe a more fully well-rounded human being, uh,
Mhm.
who actually, like, I'm fine. I'm like, work is still important and I love my work, but there's all these other parts of me that I love. Like I'm like learning Hindustani classical music, and I love gardening, and I do my yoga, and I love traveling and expect these are all important parts of me, and it's not just my work. So I think
Your work.
that's an important thing that I at least got out of therapy. Yeah.
So, first off, thank you for sharing
Mm,
so vulnerably. I think
mm,
you're right. I think what you said when I asked the question in terms of people not being comfortable talking about this, I think you're absolutely right. There is a certain degree of secrecy. Maybe you feel kind of there's a certain degree of maybe embarrassment or shame surrounding sharing, having these low moments, and there's also, I think, a lot of stereotyping, of women who have postpartum anything,
mm,
anxiety, blues,
yeah.
depression. So thank you for being
Mm,
vulnerable about that and sharing something about that. I think again, this is so valuable for anyone who is listening, specifically feeling anything, right? They don't have to have had your exact same experience, but I can only imagine just the grief part that you shared, right? A picture
mm,
of what you thought life would
mm,
be and what it ended up being. And I think, as practical as we may want to be, and like you said, you were crisis managing and you had an objective and you were working towards that, which I think is a very practical way to go about that situation. But when you stop and everything stops, it's when you have to live with the discomfort of all the feelings that you didn't take care of at the
exactly.
time, is when it all hits you all of a
Exactly.
sudden. I think there's a small part of it that I can relate to, in that I had my son during the pandemic. So I think I
Yeah.
didn't realize it. I think I was in a little bit of a bubble, that I missed out on just having a normal life. I
Yeah.
couldn't
Yeah.
go out, I couldn't meet people, I couldn't do anything on a whim. It was an episode
Yeah.
of security and sanitization and just ultimate
Yeah.
panic. And I think I carried that into my fourth
Mm,
trimester. I carried this
mm,
heavy amount of panic around health. I thought,
yeah.
there was just virus everywhere you look. Like, you get into this
Yeah.
space,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
you grieve that. You grieve. I remember my Seemandam. I only had my closest family. There was no one else who was allowed to come because of obvious reasons. And now when I look at people who are having a Seemandam, there's a little part of me that feels
Yeah.
like, hey, and I know in the larger scheme of things, it really doesn't matter. I get that
But
these are all
yeah,
just little events, but I think there is something to be said for, a picture in your head and what you thought could happen and what does happen. And, having that comparison and grieving that a little bit and feeling the feelings that come with it, right? And not being ashamed to do so, because there's also so much self-judgment. Like, why am I feeling this way? I should be really happy. I should be grateful that everything's okay now, blah, blah,
yeah.
blah. And I think that that's just added pressure in an already pretty
Correct.
under-resourced, highly anxious kind of a situation. Uh, you touched upon a couple of points that I wanted to sort of build on. I know you talked about therapy as a way that you sought out to cope with everything that you were going through from a feelings perspective. What were some of the other things along with therapy, maybe, with your relationships, your family, maybe stuff that you read, or whatever community you built around yourself to get you through this? And what would you advise anyone who may be going through the same or something similar to help
Yeah,
themselves with?
yeah, great question. I think one of the things I did want to talk about was community, because I think, and not from an I had it perspective, but I didn't have it perspective, because I think that's something I really missed, right? Because I hadn't planned to be there. I didn't, so I didn't actually set up, women friends or mom friends or anything, or people who are in a similar situation that I had around me.
Yeah.
Um, and then because the circumstances were so unique, I couldn't relate to like mom groups and stuff like that online, because I'm literally talking about, is my kid going to survive or not? And it's very hard for me to have a conversation with someone who's saying, oh yeah, they're not feeding as much. Like it's just like none of those is good or bad, but it's just so
It's not
different
on the
that it's
same
really
level. Yeah.
exactly. Um, so I think I really missed community. And I remember at one point, I found a Facebook page of NICU parents, NICU parents, and it, and I never posted on it even, but I just finding it, I used to like just keep scrolling it because it was finally like, oh my God, there are other people who are going through this, right? And most of it was not in, actually, I think none of it was in India. It was lots of people in the US and the UK, some in Australia who were posting on this group. And so the experiences were not exactly the same, but they had so many things in common. And it was like the closest I could get to, people who were living through what I was living through. And,
Yeah.
I think that actually really, really did help me. I was also, I think, in a very lucky position. If this had to happen to me anywhere in the world, this happened in Bangalore, where, you know, um, I had my parents. So I just lived with my mom for, this entire period. So I didn't have to think about, how to run a house, or, is there food on the table, or is I didn't have to think about any of that.
Yeah.
And I had my mom. The hospital was super close. It was like 6 minutes away from us, so we could do this back and forth multiple times during the day and in the middle of the night, and all of that was relatively easy. And we had access to world class care. Like if this had happened in Kenya, we didn't have all of East Africa has one NICU. There's no way, like she just wouldn't have made it in anywhere else. So
Wow.
so I think that that obviously, like on a very practical level, was hugely helpful. I think you asked for other supporting mechanisms. I think I had to do a lot of work to figure out, how do I find that place of calm, and how do I find things that give me joy, right? And that was like a space of exploration for me, because I didn't already know it or have it. And so I think the things that really helped me were mindfulness helped me a whole lot. Just and going slowly, but really actually finding a way to be centered. And it's something that, I've ended up incorporating into my life. So, even now, like in the middle of the day, I will stop once and do like one deep relaxation or something like that to just bring me back to, uh, some centeredness. And then I think the other thing that we as a couple did, which we actually did throughout, was we actually made time for us to go out and do something fun, right? And my mom was always like, "It's amazing that you guys are able to do this," but like even when she was in the NICU, we'd like go out and have a meal or meet some friends, and it it really helped, And I think, speaking of friends, we had two close friends from undergrad who happened to be in the city at the same time as we were there. And literally, they would come every Saturday. They would come and they would just park in our house. And they were this lovely combination of, they would ask us about Amaani and how she's doing, and they were really invested. But once that was done, they would actually just be fully normal. Like there was no pity and there was no like we have to hold you. They'd just be completely normal. And so we had this like we could just be ourselves, and you could be your college self, right? Which is a really nice
Yeah.
self to get to be. And I think that was actually a really lovely part of this whole thing for us.
No, that makes complete sense. I think what you're saying is essentially people, community in whatever shape that works for you is really what anchors you back to a version of yourself that makes you feel okay, right? And I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that's what I was able to find in common with a lot of what you shared. When I had my son Surya, we were in the middle of a pandemic, so I felt like my connection with people also had really come down. You're always
yeah,
virtual, so you're not really meeting
yeah,
a lot of people. And in the first year of his life, we were living in another country. I think I was, it's like lonely max. You're already kind of
mm,
lonely because you're feeding at all times. You really feel like you're the only person in the world sometimes, like when you're in those moments, especially in deep
yeah,
dark in the night.
yeah,
I think to myself that those were moments where you could really use someone, like you said, right? Someone who isn't really like feeling sorry for you, but just reminds you about who you used to be. And that's a very healthy nostalgia to have in moments like that
yeah,
because it anchors you to something that you're familiar with, which is why I think we like to watch reruns of shows we really love. And, I
mm,
remember at some point when I was, going through these bouts of a little bit of loneliness, I would like rewatch Modern Family. It was such a wholesome show that really just made me feel like I was enveloped by a lot of people, and I could clearly tell that's what I wanted at the time. So I really love what you shared. There was another thing that you talked about in,
mm,
when you were sharing earlier about how, and this is not the first, in fact, moment in conversations I've had with a lot of moms because most folks are in their 30s. Seems to be a theme that we're picking up on. And it's interesting how empowered we are as a group in terms of knowing what we like, knowing what we want. There's also a great deal of control that we enjoy in our lives and how
mm,
uncontrolled this entire journey is. But I think you touched upon how your life changed, where your identity, the locus of your identity
mm,
shifted from your work defining everything to being a lot more multi-dimensional. And I think it's
mm,
something I
mm,
completely relate to.
mm,
In fact, I feel like I have become a better professional now after
mm.
having other interests outside of my work that I
Mm,
actively explore than I was before I had my son. And I think has
mm,
just made me I didn't know this right away, but I totally understand, why you would say that. And
mm,
I think I know there's a lot of folks that I talk to who struggle with this balance piece, right? What do I do more of? What do I do less of? I've been through that journey as well. When I got back to work after my maternity break, I think I had a lot of guilt in terms of
mm,
not doing justice to any one thing properly. I think that's one little space I wanted to, touch upon with
mm.
you as we sort of, wind down our conversation. I know there's so much that we can actually talk about, and I'm definitely going to get you back on to talk more about, especially the years ahead in terms of parenting and how Amani
Mm.
is doing. But how have you juggled the decision with respect to work? Because I know, I have some sense of your career. I know what you've been up to. I'm sure there are calls that you've had to make. Talk a little bit about how that journey was for you.
Yeah, yeah. I think the career one is an important one, and I'll just say this in passing, but this is actually much more important than passing. But I think I think what makes a huge difference as we all know, is a supportive spouse, right?
Yeah,
So I think I never the what was lucky is I never had to have a conversation with Sandeep about whether I would go back to work or not, right? Like it was very clear that I would, and if I don't, it's only because I don't want to, or I can't at this point of time. But that's all. So I think that's a
absolutely.
luxury that a lot of people don't have between their spouse and the family and all of that. So I never got any of that. So just wanted to say that. I think I think I started to say, like for me, work was for a long time just this way of like somehow getting back to normal, right? And I wanted to speed that up as much as I could.
Yeah.
So literally as soon as she came home, I was like, okay, now I need to go back to work. And I like started job hunting, and then she got admitted to hospital again. And I remember I had this super strange moment where she's inside the NICU. I've stepped out of the NICU and I'm on a call with someone like interviewing for like some strategy position. And I was like, what am I doing? Right? Have you lost your mind? Like you just can't keep powering through like this. And so I actually just like I said, okay, I have to put this on ice and I have to not do this to like I can't, right? I have a sick child who might die in the NICU right now. Like I cannot be like doing a job hunt. It's not feasible. Um, and so I think what I tried to do when she came back was, do some very, you know, flexible kind of consulting work that I did, but just having that anchor was actually very useful because it just
Yeah.
gave me a chance to use my mind and to, do a few things. I got invited to a couple of conferences. I went for them. Like just those small things actually really, really helped to just connect me a little bit to that part of my life. I ended up going back to work when Amaani was about 1.5.
Okay.
20, yeah, 1.5. Yeah, yeah. I went back in Feb 2019. Yeah, correct, correct. So she was 1.5, and I think that was the right time, but I was also very careful about what I went back to, right? Because I you know I was very transparent in at that time in my life. What I needed above everything else was like flexibility and understanding, right? So I remember
100%.
talking I remember talking to the founders when I was interviewing and saying, I'm just letting you know there's a lot of craziness in my life right now. This is the situation with my child. My dad was very ill. I was like, this is what it's going to look like. So I cannot tell you this thing. And I negotiated upfront that I'm going to work from home twice a week and be in the office 3 times a week, right? And I think this was pre-COVID, so it wasn't, as
A
common as it
thing.
is. It wasn't
Yeah.
a thing the way it is now. Um, and I found that I actually ended up having to use every little bit of that flexibility that I had negotiated because there was so much craziness in those years.
Yeah.
Um, but I think maybe one last thing to share. I think when you go back to work, there's just your life then gets you have so many things happening then suddenly in your life, right? And one thing I remember that I found very useful was actually making sure you do transitions well. Um, and what I mean is, how life just bleeds into each other, right? So you like
Yeah.
literally you wake up, you're doing stuff with your kid and you're getting ready till the moment. Then you're this thing on your commute, you're doing calls, you're in the office, all the way back, you're doing calls, and then you hit the family life again and you've been away all day. So you just go and then it's time to sleep, right? That's what life looks like. And I found that just, forcing myself to take that 5 minutes. Like sometimes I'd come home and I would literally sit in the car park in my car for 5 minutes and breathe and think or just listen to some music, like something that's just absolutely tiny, but would make a big difference to me feeling like, okay, that part is over and now this part is starting and it's not just all one
Mesh
thing.
together.
Yeah.
No, I think I can relate to everything you're saying. I think it's absolutely required to have flexibility in work when you have a baby who didn't have Amani's experience. So I can only imagine the experience you might have needed. Flexibility for parents is what keeps us employed. That's how you'll have more women in leadership positions up the
Yeah.
chain. It's a
Yeah.
no-brainer. More companies should be actively considering how to make
Absolutely.
sure that women are supported in this time period. And I think that I hear some pretty problematic and upsetting things sometimes in this topic. But I think we all have, there's a lot of self advocacy. And I think what you talked about in terms of negotiating and being transparent upfront, I don't think you'd ever hear. I don't know how many men or how many fathers have that conversation, right? And I'm not
Or have
blaming
to have that
anyone.
conversation, right?
Correct. And I think it's a very interesting world we live in despite being in 2024. And I think that's definitely a topic you and I should get into at some
Yeah.
point when we speak again. But I love your point on transitions. I have absolutely felt it that the day basically feels like you're on survival mode from the moment you wake up to the moment you are asleep. Like you can physically feel every cell in your body tense up and tense down. And it's not even that you're actively trying it, it's just
Mhm.
basically, I don't know, I think you get into this stress response mode, especially earlier on where
And then you
you're
can't shake
always
it.
trying to, yeah, you're trying to keep your baby alive, right? You're trying to make sure that they're healthy, they're safe, they're fed. Every
Mhm.
cry feels like, life or death. And once you've gotten into this cycle, early on, it's so
Mhm.
hard to break out of that. I actively tell myself, and I've read this somewhere, that you have to tell yourself that everything is
It's
okay.
okay.
And I think you have to tell yourself you're not being chased, no one is dying, everything's fine, you're not, this is not a fight or flight. Like you have to actually cognitively talk yourself off the ledge. And I think, like you, I do this. I literally sit in the car and I breathe and I tell myself that this is not a dangerous situation. And I can completely relate. The transitions are super important. I want to share this really funny story with you. I remember I used to be, I had this, I guess it's a quirk. I used to have this need to sit down and eat my meal um, without anyone kind of talking to me. It was one of those things where I just
Mhm.
needed like 10 minutes to myself to eat a meal with like and do whatever I wanted to do. I didn't have to
Yeah.
engage, I didn't have to problem solve, I don't have to like do anything. I've always been this person, like especially in
Mm,
my
mm.
adulthood in some sense. And I remember being robbed of that, obviously, in your early days, and you're always responding, you're reacting. And
Yeah.
I'm anyway
Yeah.
always the first responder in most situations
Mm.
in life. And I remember just feeling so upset about not getting the 5 minutes to sit down and have a meal. And it's so funny. I think about that now. I think about the person that used to get upset about that, and think about what is it that she really needed. She needed to remember that she still mattered, that she still, she was still an entity of her own, and she wasn't just a life giving or a feeding or a, like she's her own entity. And I think now when I definitely have so many more boundaries about when I need those 5 minutes and those 10 minutes, right? And I'm not only advocating for myself, I'm actively helping other people in my life also do the same thing. So I related to so much of what you shared, Danaya, and I think I'm so moved by your story and what you've been through. I mean, you come off as a really strong and loving and kind person. And I really have to say that at this point in the
Oh,
conversation. That's really, really
that's very
lovely.
sweet.
And I'm so glad Amani is, thriving and doing fantastically. I mean, that's just brilliant. And I'm so happy to hear that. So obviously we've talked
Yeah.
about a lot of serious things. You will surely have some laugh out loud moments from all of the madness that you've encountered. Anything that comes to mind from those early days that, actually made you laugh, like, enjoy a light moment. Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, there's so many things that were a little bit funny then that are much more funny when you look back on it,
In
right?
retrospect. Yeah.
Uh, so we sent, so Amani is one of these super social little kids, right? Like she needs
Lovely.
the engagement. So she went to school at 1.5 because, oh no, close to two. Yeah, close to two, because she needed to. Like this kid needed other kids around her. So right before she went to school, we decided, okay, we'll do a nice family trip, and this is like a big moment before she goes to school. So we like get on that time there's a direct flight to Phuket. We were like, we'll get on this flight to Phuket. We will go. We'll have this great time. And Amani has this, what we didn't know then, but we have realized over time, this unerring ability to have to poop as soon as the seatbelt sign goes off, right? So So we're supposed to land, and this child, of course, has to poop. She says, "I'm pooping." She poops this massive poop, and we can't get up to
Get
actually go
off
clean
the
her in the
seat.
bathroom. And of course, this
Right.
is one of these like explosive poop situations. And so we like
Fantastic.
get off the plane like Sandeep, and she's in a carrier, so like the carrier, Sandeep, everyone, this thing, and we're like this stinky phenomenon that is arriving there. We like try to clean up in the bathroom, we get our visa, and then we reach the resort just reeking, right? These people also be like, who are these people and how have they landed here?
How cute.
But
You are not my
I figured
first poop story.
I was like, this is going to be my only chance to share a poop story on a mom podcast, right? Otherwise, it's just no. Who wants to listen to these stories?
Yeah, no, you'd be amazed how many people's funny stories involve poop. So you are in good company. That is so cute. I love it. I think so. My son definitely does funny things as well involving poop. He's got this new habit, and also very much like Amani, he's super social. We put him in school probably around the same time. Under two, needed to be around people all of the time. But he does this funny thing since we're sharing that when he is, on the go and pooping, he will seclude himself. He has to be on his own, and no one has to. Basically, if we're even within shouting distance of him, he is very, very offended by our presence. No, no, go away, go away. And
I
it is
love
the
it.
most hilarious thing I have ever seen. I
So
love it. Like
funny,
he's
so cute.
in full public view, wants privacy to do a poop in his diaper, which I just think is so precious. So
That's
I totally agree
adorable.
that these are funny moments for sure. Last question for you. Like I said, then I definitely want to talk more. There's so much we can unpack.
Yeah.
But if there was a myth you could bust
Hmm.
about pregnancy and those early days, first 6 months, 1 year, you have the power to say no, this is gone. What would that be? A lot of power to
Um,
bust a myth.
I think the myth that I would like to bust is people keep saying it'll get easy. It'll get easy, right? Don't worry, it'll get easy, right? It's just the first 1 month will be hard. Just the first 3 months will be hard, and then it gets easy. Don't worry. I think yes, it does get easier, but it gets easier in years. It doesn't get easier in months,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I think just having the right expectation about what this journey is like, and of course, like all through there are moments of deep joy and connection and all the stuff that's happening to your life, but it's hard and it's hard for a long time. And yeah, we had it harder than yeah, in some ways, but everyone has their own dimensions on which it's hard for them, right? And so I think that takes time, and it takes work, and it takes I don't know, just a, a level of being gentle with yourself. And I think
Yeah,
we're all we're I think our system has us be very harsh on ourselves. And so I like my at least my advice to people who are starting this journey is to just be kind to yourself, be treat yourself with that gentleness that you would give someone else who's in this position. Give it to yourself. uh, I think it makes a
absolutely.
difference.
I can totally relate. I think it's a very specific brand of jadedness, that I've encountered where there's only two extremes I've ever seen. One is exactly what you're talking about. Oh, it gets easier. I specifically note that with people who are either, sort of in a different generation, typically, who, sort of are a little bit dismissive of the overall experience. And I know it's well intentioned sometimes, but in certain cases, it feels like you're not being seen or heard, right? And your own unique experience. Little bit jaded, saying this is nothing, or everything will be fine. People, it's all good. Kind of very 80,000 feet level kind of view on life. Obviously, because you have a lot more experience under your belt, and I think it's important to give some validation to people who are going through what they're going through,
Mm.
right? Even if it's small, even if it's temporary, what have you. I've also noted the other extreme where people are on the reverse side jaded. Oh, if
Mm.
this is nothing, wait till that. That is nothing, wait till this.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah.
quite over it. If I had the power to bust a myth, I would do away with things like, the terminologies like terrible twos and this. I feel like most of the time it's people, grown-ups, who are probably being a little worse than the children because they don't know what they're doing. They need us,
Correct,
to
correct.
figure stuff out. I think I would definitely share your belief in what myth to bust, and I would add. I keep adding every time I talk to people. I'm adding more myths to bust, so a long
There are
list that
lots
I'm
to go
working on.
around.
Yeah. Tanaya, this has been absolutely lovely. Thank you so
No,
much for taking the time in the middle of the day for you, I
no,
know,
no,
to
no.
talk to me and share your story. I know that a lot of parents out there will hear something that they can relate to and hopefully find, that optimism in a tough spot, right? So I think that's really, really powerful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
No, no, thank you. And it's just really nice to have a conversation with someone who's so insightful and has clearly done work on themselves. And this is the nice thing about, speaking to some women. So it's just, yeah, absolutely my pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Tanaya. I wanted to share some important takeaways from the discussion. Healing from birth in general takes time, but when you have a traumatic experience, it's all the more complex and requires really special attention. First off, every experience is very different, and comparison is just not useful. Parents in this time are rarely taking time for their own well being, and they will require the most support in this period. Apart from making safe spaces for them to be emotionally vulnerable, grieve, and process their experiences, it's important for relatives or other caregivers around new families dealing with a tough post birth experience to be present and offer support in areas that might reduce their physical load, like getting them meals or buying resources that they need. Another important takeaway from the discussion with Tanaya was really about talking about the problem and how that makes us so much stronger. To me, she represents a community of strong and resilient parents who are willing to talk about the challenges that they faced. This not only empowers her, where she is able to process and discuss her experience through every single sharing, but it's important for other parents who may be going through something similar to be able to understand that they're not alone. I actively encourage conversations around pregnancy, birth, and early parenting in your circles that goes beyond the child and spotlights the parent. Remember, having a baby really does change us, so we do have to show up for ourselves and our little ones with grace and compassion. Think of many of the following suggestions, including using your friends and family for support. Remember, you are not alone. Taking time for yourself, even if it's 15 minutes every day to do something that reminds you of your old self, is so important. Don't be in a rush to bounce back. And remember, you can also seek support through counseling and therapy. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you on the next episode of Bump In.